The morning of the Christmas preparations rose with a pale gold light that barely warmed the frost clinging to the settlement roofs. Evelyn stood in the church kitchen before the sun fully climbed the ridge, sleeves rolled past her elbows, hair pinned back in soft, hurried curls. The room felt like a sanctuary before the day's footsteps disturbed it. She breathed in the stillness, the wooden counters smelling faintly of flour and pine oil, the hearth kindling crackling like small promises. Cooking was where her worries slowed, where the world finally felt readable. Every ingredient obeyed her hands, every spice trusted her judgment. Here, she was enough. She laid out carrots, onions, and herbs with the deliberateness of someone arranging pieces of her own heart. The venison simmered in the kettle, steam rising in delicate swirls. She stirred slowly, the warmth kissing her cheeks. This feast mattered. It wasn't just for Christmas. It was her way of proving to herself that she could still offer something beautiful, even if beauty was the one thing she believed she lacked. Outside, the settlement crackled awake. Boots crunching snow, children laughing, horses snorting clouds of breath into the air. But the sound that made Evelyn pause was heavier, deeper, a rhythm that seemed carved from the earth. She knew who it belonged to long before he appeared in the doorway. Tawa Greyhawk stood framed by the morning light, the snow on his shoulders catching the soft glow like shattered stars. His chest was bare again, skin bronzed and steady, though a beaded necklace hung across it today, glowing faintly in the dim. His gaze moved gently across the kitchen before settling on her, and for one suspended breath, the world felt smaller and quieter, as if winter itself were holding its breath. Evelyn straightened, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're up early." "So are you," he replied, stepping inside. Winter rewards the ones who begin before the cold grows stubborn. She tried not to stare at the snow melting down the ridges of muscle along his arms. He closed the door softly, careful not to disturb the pots on the nearby shelf. Tawa moved through the space with the respectful silence of someone entering a sacred lodge. "I didn't expect visitors this morning," she murmured, reaching for a towel as if she needed something to hold on to. "Pastor said the town prepares a feast," he answered, stopping near the table. "He asked if I would help carry firewood, but he pointed here first. Said you might want an extra pair of hands." Evelyn blinked. Pastor Wilburn always had his quiet ways of nudging people together. She looked at the pile of carrots waiting to be chopped. "I can handle most of it." Tawa picked up a knife with the ease of someone who had lived off the land his whole life. "You do not have to handle things alone." The words made her throat tighten unexpectedly. She nodded, letting him take the vegetables. He chopped with steady precision, the kind that spoke of discipline, not haste. His movements were rhythmic, almost meditative. Evelyn couldn't help glancing at him again and again, not because he was magnificent to look at, though he was, but because he looked at her without the flicker of judgment she had been conditioned to expect. The church filled gradually as the morning bloomed. Children peeked in, giggling as they ran through hallways. Women organized decorations, though some paused at the doorway of the kitchen, their eyes widening as they saw Tawa working beside Evelyn. Gossip sparked like flint. Martha Klein's whisper slithered through the room the moment she caught sight of them. Imagine that, her of all people, cooking beside an Apache. Think she's trying to impress him? A man like that would never. Evelyn's shoulders curled, shame flickering like a flame caught in wind. But before her breath could fully falter, Tawa turned his head, eyes steady on her, not the women. He didn't need to ask what the whispers were. He had lived long enough to know cruelty by the shape of its shadow. "Their words do not belong to you," he said softly. She nodded without looking up, but the tension in her fingers softened. As the stew thickened and the bread baked, she began to feel the strange calm that only his presence seemed to bring. He didn't fill the air with talk, he filled it with steadiness. The silence between them felt less like emptiness, more like the space where two souls could learn each other's shape. At noon, the door swung open and Jonas Pike entered, his steps loud, his grin louder. He carried a crate of apples, though his eyes were fixed on Evelyn. "Afternoon, Evie. Looks like you've got quite the assistant today." Tawa didn't respond, continuing to chop. Evelyn flushed. Jonas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Didn't know you were keeping such impressive company." She swallowed. He's just helping. Jonas chuckled. Sure he is. Don't let him fool you, Evie. Men like that only stick around when there's something in it for them. A muscle in Tawa's jaw pulsed. He set down the knife with calm precision. Evelyn opened her mouth, but Jonas was already turning to leave, satisfied with the little bruise he'd planted. When the door shut behind him, the air felt colder, thinner. Evelyn's eyes settled on her hands, fluttering slightly. I'm sorry, she whispered, though she didn't know why. For what? Tawa asked. For being me, she said quietly. For causing whispers. Trouble. Looks. Anything. Tawa stepped toward her, not with haste, but with intention. When he reached her side, he spoke so gently she almost thought she imagined it. You are not trouble. People twist what they do not try to understand. She stared into the kettle, watching the broth tremble. Her heart felt like something fragile made of warm dough, soft, vulnerable, shaped by hands that didn't always know gentleness. And here stood a man who held strength like a shield and silence like a prayer. The day stretched on. They cooked through waves of footsteps, laughter and drifting snow. As the hall filled with scents of rosemary and fire-roasted meat, the mood in town lifted. People peeked into the kitchen, drawn by aroma and curiosity. Children asked questions. Women stole glances. Men grunted greetings toward Tawa, unsure of whether to acknowledge him or pretend he wasn't there. Through it all, Evelyn felt a strange warmth blooming at the edges of her chest, an emotion that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite fear, but something woven between them. The afternoon light dimmed early, as winter days often do. The sky melted into a shade of soft gray-blue, and snowflakes drifted heavier than before. Tawa stepped outside to fetch more firewood, and the moment he left, the room felt colder. Evelyn stirred the stew, thinking of his words, the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with a quiet kind of reverence she didn't know how to hold. Martha entered again, leaning against the counter with a smirk. My, Evelyn Hart. Looks like you've caught the attention of the big warrior. Didn't think he'd go for someone with so much softness. Evelyn pressed her lips together. Her hands shook slightly. Snow drifted down over the settlement, as if the sky were shaking loose all the softness it refused to give the people who lived beneath it. Chimneys exhaled thin curls of smoke, lantern glass breathed fog in slow sighs, and every porch plank creaked like an old bone surrendering to winter's weight. In the middle of that quiet, Evelyn Hart walked with her shoulders folded inward, shawl hugging her like a memory of warmth rather than the real thing. Her dress stretched across her fuller hips, fabric whispering with every careful step, and though no one said anything outright, she could feel the eyes that always seemed to follow her. Eyes that measured but did not understand, eyes that made her wish she could shrink into snow and disappear. Her breath puffed in short clouds as she crossed the churchyard, the smell of pine resin and cold iron sharpening her senses. Pastor Wilburn waved at her from the steps, his beard touched with frost, his coat a patchwork of decades. He was one of the few who looked at her, without weighing her worth against her waistline. She managed a small smile as she approached, though her heart had begun another one of its slow bruisings the moment she stepped outside. Inside the church hall, wooden tables waited like sleeping beasts. She would bring them to life with food later. Pies steaming with spiced squash, roasted venison brushed with honey, cornbread baked in heavy cast-iron pans. Cooking was the place where Evelyn never failed. In a world that made her feel like too much, her food never felt like enough. People devoured every plate and then turned their eyes away from the woman who made it. Martha Klein arrived with her usual wind of whispers. Her coat too thin for winter, because fashion mattered more than warmth in her world. She leaned toward another woman, lips curled like a needle. They didn't speak loudly, but loud enough for Evelyn's back to stiffen. Useful girl. Good cook. Sweet but not much to look at. The kind men are friendly to, not drawn to. Evelyn busied herself with stacking wooden bowls, pretending she didn't hear. Pretending she had the kind of skin thick enough to keep out cold words. She told herself she was here to serve, not to be seen, but even her lies to herself felt fragile these days. Jonas Pike entered next, snow on his hat brim, boots stomping in a rhythm that once made Evelyn's heart flutter. He had the charm of a man who smiled easily and loved himself even more easily. She had admired him, silently, gently, the way someone admires a bird they know could never land in their hands. Jonas saw her, paused, and gave that half-grin he saved for moments when he wanted to seem kind without the burden of being tender. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. She lifted a bowl as if it were a shield. Jonas stepped closer, voice soft but carrying the weight of dismissal beneath it. "Evelyn, you're sweet, you know that. But you're not the sort of woman a man imagines building a life with. You're better suited for helping folks, not romance." He thought he was sparing her. He thought he was gentle. But Evelyn felt something in her chest sink like riverstone. She nodded, throat tight, and he walked away believing he'd done a good thing. She left the church early, cold air rushing at her like a truth she couldn't outrun. Her heart throbbed in heavy pulses as she made her way along the snowy path, the settlement stretching out in muted browns and grays. She hugged her shawl closer, wishing winter could freeze away the parts of her that hurt the most. At the edge of town, where the land dropped into a narrow valley, she saw movement, massive, steady, quiet. A figure approached from the tree line, tall as a carved totem and twice as solid. The giant Apache warrior who had arrived earlier that week walked with an unhurried rhythm, each step sinking deep into the snow as if winter parted for him, not the other way around. Tawa Greyhawk was unlike anyone she had ever seen. Bare-chested despite the cold, his skin bronze and marked with the storylines of old battles. Muscles carved by years of labor and survival rippled beneath the falling snow. His hair hung long, black as riverstone in moonlight, braided loosely down his back. People feared him, respected him, whispered about him. But the moment his eyes lifted toward Evelyn, something warm flickered there. Something quiet, steady and strangely gentle. She stumbled slightly, embarrassed by being seen in the aftermath of her rejection. He noticed the tremor in her hands long before she could tuck them into her shawl. "You carry too much alone," he said, his voice deep enough to anchor the drifting snowflakes. She shook her head. "I'm used to it." He studied her with a calm so complete it felt like a blanket. When he stepped closer, she noticed the snow melting instantly when it touched his skin, as if even winter bent to his heat. "Strength is not a burden," he murmured. "Winter respects those who endure." Evelyn blinked, unsure how to respond. No one ever spoke to her like that, not as though her body was a flaw, but a testament. She tried to slip past him, but he gently took the crate she was carrying, lifting it with an ease that made her breath catch. Not because of his strength, but the softness with which he used it. "I can manage," she whispered. "I am big enough." "You are strong enough," he corrected, and the way he said it made her feel something she had never felt in her life, seen without judgment. He carried the crate alongside her, unhurried, unassuming. Snow collected on his shoulders, on the braids in his hair, on her shawl, until they both looked like two weary travelers walking through the same long winter. When they reached the church steps again, he set the crate down with a quiet reverence, as though the object mattered simply because she had touched it. She opened her mouth to thank him, but the words tangled with a sudden rush of emotion, a mix of humiliation, hope, and an ache she couldn't name. Tawa's gaze softened. "Something troubles you." She shook her head quickly. "Nothing that matters." "Everything that wounds the heart matters," he replied. Her breath faltered. His voice felt like a lantern glow cutting through the cold. Before she could respond, distant voices echoed from the church doorway, Martha and Jonas laughing at something. Evelyn's chest tightened. She took a step back as if retreat were instinct. Tawa watched her, expression unreadable but deeply aware. Snow thickened around them, drifting in a slow spiral. Evelyn turned away, heart pounding, feeling the heat of his gaze follow her. Something had shifted. Something small but undeniable. She didn't know if it was hope or danger or both mingled together. But as she reached the top step, a gust of wind lifted the snow between them like a curtain, and she heard him say, almost too softly for the world to catch, "I see more than others choose to." She froze, breath trembling, a shiver rolling through her that had nothing to do with the cold. For the first time that winter, it felt like the storm was not happening around her, but inside her, waiting to break open. Before she could answer, the door opened and Tawa returned, arms laden with wood, snow on his lashes. He heard enough. His gaze locked on Martha, calm but unmoving, before turning to Evelyn with a warmth that felt like a shield. "Evelyn," he said, setting the wood down with deliberate care, "winter listens to the ones who carry warmth. Do not let cold voices change your fire." Martha stiffened, taken aback by the dignity in his tone, then muttered something and left. Silence settled again. Deep, full, trembling. Evelyn didn't speak, afraid anything she said would break whatever fragile truth had just been placed between them. Tawa returned to her side, his presence quiet, protective, patient. As the final pot finished simmering, evening shadows crawled into the corners of the hall, long and soft. Outside, snow thickened, blanketing the world in pale hush. Evelyn lit lanterns one by one, their flames casting amber halos across the walls. She turned, and found Tawa watching her, not with the curiosity of a stranger, but with the steadiness of someone who had already chosen where to stand. "There is something you hide from yourself," he said quietly. Her breath shivered. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, the lantern light catching the gold in his eyes. "You pretend you are small, when your spirit fills every room you walk into." Her fingers froze against the lantern wick. The kettle whistled behind her. Somewhere outside, the church bell chimed faintly. And in that suspended moment, she knew something had shifted. Because the way he looked at her was not the way anyone had looked at her in her entire life. And she was terrified he could see exactly how much she wanted to believe him. Night settled over the settlement like a great wool blanket, heavy, muffling, thick with cold. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the lanterns outside the church, glowing like tiny wandering stars. The Christmas feast was only hours away, and the hall buzzed with chatter and boots stomping the cold from their soles. But Evelyn heard little of it. She had excused herself after Martha's last comment, heart fluttering like a startled bird, and stepped outside into the quiet. The wind brushed her cheeks with icy fingers. She wrapped her shawl tighter, breath fogging into the night. The laughter from inside sounded far away, like a world she wasn't quite part of. The sting of whispered judgments still clung to her skin, and Jonas's earlier smirk echoed in her memory. She walked toward the edge of the church grounds, where the lantern light softened and the snow looked untouched, as if it waited only for her footsteps. She stopped beside the old storage shed, placing her hands on its cold wooden frame, letting the chill ground her. Tears burned before they fell, and she tried to blink them back, ashamed of how easily words, careless, sharp, could undo her. She whispered to the night, as if confessing to the dark itself. "I try so hard to be small, and still they see me as too much." The wind didn't answer. But a deeper, slower rhythm did, the soft crunch of snow under powerful steps. Evelyn stiffened, wiping her cheeks quickly. She didn't want anyone to see her like this, especially not. Tawa Greyhawk stepped into view, shadows painting his broad frame in muted bronze and silver. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, melting against the heat of his skin. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, studying her with a patience that made her feel seen rather than cornered. She tried to compose herself, but her voice emerged as a broken thread. "I'm fine." He moved closer, not quickly, not insistently, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew wounded spirits refused sudden movements. "The cold doesn't lie," he said softly. "Your breath trembles. Your eyes burn. Your hands hold the air as though it might steady you." She swallowed. "I just needed a moment. That's all." He glanced toward the church, the windows glowing with rising festivities, then back to her. "You walked away from warmth to stand alone in the cold. That is not nothing." Her throat tightened. Words she'd held back all day surged forward with the urgency of thawing rivers. "Jonas said things. Martha said things. And I know they're right." She gestured toward her body with a helpless twist. "I'm not the sort of woman a man chooses. I'm useful. Kind. Good to have in the kitchen. But not the kind you take pride in." Tawa's brows drew together, not in anger, but in something deeper. Grief, maybe, or a realization of how much she had been taught to wound herself. "Evelyn, you are not too much. You are what the earth intended, full of strength, full of warmth. The winter does not shrink itself. Neither should you." She shook her head, tears spilling now, hot against the cold. "You don't know what it's like, being laughed at, whispered about. Being told that your worth ends where your body begins. Tawa stepped closer until he stood only inches away, the heat radiating from him melting the snow between them. I know what it is to be judged by a world that does not understand you. I know what it is to carry stories on your skin and be feared for them. But I do not let others decide my shape. You must not let them decide yours. She looked up at him, heart pounding with a strange mixture of shame and hope. Her tears shimmered in the lantern glow. I wish I could believe that. He lifted a hand slowly, giving her a chance to pull away. When she didn't, he brushed his thumb lightly across her cheek. Gentle, reverent, as if touching something sacred. Your heart has been taught the wrong language, he murmured. Let me teach it another. The touch stole her breath. She had been touched before, accidental brushes in crowded rooms, brief embraces from Pastor Wilburn. But never like this. Never with intention. Never with respect. Never with a softness that sparked warmth deep in the center of her chest. Before she could respond, distant footsteps approached. Jonas Pike, clearly halfway drunk, staggered around the corner. He stopped when he saw them, surprise sharpening into something sour. Well, well. Evie, you've upgraded your company tonight. Evelyn stepped back, cheeks flaming. Jonas's voice turned mocking, slurred but cutting. I always wondered. Do you think a man like him would ever want someone like you? Or is he just hungry and knows you'll feed him? Evelyn's breath stuttered. Her eyes dropped to the snow. Tawa did not move quickly. He didn't need to. He stepped forward with the quiet authority of a storm forming over mountains. His voice was calm, but every syllable felt carved from stone. Leave her. Jonas scoffed. Or what? You'll beat me? You savages are all the same. The air shifted. Tawa didn't lift his fists. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped close enough that Jonas felt the full weight of him. His presence, his calm, his power restrained like a drawn bow. I protect what others try to break, he said. Walk away. Jonas swallowed, stepped back, and stumbled into the night. Evelyn watched him go, breath shaking. When she looked at Tawa again, his eyes had softened once more. He is not worth your tears, Tawa said quietly. It's not just him, she whispered. It's all of them. All the little ways they remind me that I don't fit the shape they expect. Tawa's voice dropped lower, gentler. Then perhaps you are meant for a different world than theirs. The words hit her like a warm wind in the middle of winter. She found herself stepping closer to him without meaning to. The snow thickened, falling in slow, shimmering sheets around them, turning the moment into something unreal, something suspended between breaths. Tawa looked down at her as though searching for the right language, one made not of words but of truth. You carry a fire they cannot see, Evelyn. But I see it. She felt her breath catch. Her heart fluttered like wings against her ribs. And for the first time in her life, she didn't try to hide the longing in her eyes. The wind quieted. The lantern flickered. Their breath mingled in the cold air, visible, fragile, intertwined. Tawa lowered his voice even further, barely more than a whisper. There is more to say, more than you are ready to hear tonight. Evelyn swallowed hard, feeling the world tilt gently beneath her. What do you mean? He stepped back slowly, as if resisting the pull between them. When the time is right, you will understand. She felt something inside her pulse with both fear and aching hope. The night wrapped around them, snow falling thicker, the silence deeper. And in that widening quiet, she realized she was no longer afraid of being seen, but terrified of what she might feel next. The night deepened, settling into a quiet that seemed almost sacred. Snow drifted slow and heavy over the rooftops, each flake spinning like a small spirit in the lantern glow. Inside the church hall, the feast had dwindled to a hum. Most of the guests had eaten their fill and returned to their homes, leaving only murmuring voices and flickering candles behind. Evelyn stood near the hearth, wiping her hands on her apron as the last tray was emptied. Her body ached, not from exhaustion, but from the tension that had followed her all day. Whispers, stares, the cold bite of old insecurities she had tried so desperately to bury. Yet beneath those wounds, something else lived. A warmth she didn't know how to name, a quiet pulse that had begun the moment Tawa Greyhawk stepped into her morning, and had only grown stronger since. She felt it now, humming faintly in her chest, refusing to be ignored. Pastor Wilburn approached her with a gentle smile, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You fed them well, Evelyn. You fed their stomachs and steadied their hearts. It's a gift." She nodded, grateful but restless. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway. She wasn't searching for anyone. That's what she told herself. But the truth was she'd been aware of Tawa's presence, or his absence, in every breath since he had walked outside to help the men with the firewood. The minutes felt longer without his quiet gravity in the room. Pastor Wilburn followed her gaze, then chuckled softly as if seeing the unspoken. He said nothing, though. He simply patted her arm and left her with the warmth of his kindness. Evelyn cleaned the tables slowly, lingering, unsure what she was waiting for. The hall felt larger now, emptier, shadows stretching long across the floorboards. She moved to the window, breath fogging the glass as she looked out into the swirling snow. The wind whispered through the eaves, carrying with it a strange stillness that made her heart tighten. The door opened behind her with a soft creak. She turned, and there he was. Tawa stepped inside, snow melting on his bare shoulders like dew on stone. His dark hair clung to his chest, heavy with winter's breath. He shut the door behind him carefully, as though he feared disturbing the fragile quiet between them. Evelyn's breath caught, her pulse quickening, but she forced herself to remain still. "You should be resting," she said softly, though the words trembled. He approached the hearth, warming his hands briefly before turning toward her. "Rest comes easier when the day feels honest," he replied, voice low. She swallowed. "And did today feel honest to you?" Tawa studied her as though weighing truths she did not yet know she had spoken. It felt honest enough to reveal what others hide. Her cheeks warmed. She looked down at her hands. The room felt too small now, holding only the two of them, and all the things neither dared to say aloud. She took a breath, gathering the edges of her courage. "You said earlier that I hide from myself, that I pretend I am small. Why did you say that? What did you see?" He moved closer, each step slow and deliberate, until he stood in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. His voice was gentle but unwavering. "I saw a woman with a fire inside her. A fire she fears will be mocked if it burns too bright." She blinked, a tear sliding down before she could stop it. He lifted a hand, brushing it away with the back of his fingers, a gesture so tender it nearly unraveled her. "And I saw a woman," he continued, "whose heart has been wounded by people who did not know how to hold it. But still it beats with more strength than any winter storm." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting herself breathe, letting herself feel the truth of his words sink deeper than she ever allowed kindness to go. She opened them again, voice barely a whisper. "You make me feel like I'm not made of the wrong things." Tawa stepped closer still, so close she could hear the slow rhythm of his breath. "You are made of the right things. Strong things. Things that comfort and endure and bring warmth into places that have forgotten how to feel." Her heart felt like it might shatter, not from pain but from the unbearable ache of being seen so clearly. Without meaning to, she reached toward him, fingers grazing the scar along his shoulder. He inhaled sharply, not from fear but from the sudden intimacy of her touch. She stared at the scar, tracing its edge gently. "This must have hurt." Tawa nodded, his eyes locked on her. "Pain teaches us different lessons. Some wounds tell us we survived. Others teach us who cares enough to see them." She felt the world tilt, the hearth glow flickering against his skin like a blessing. "Tell me what lesson this scar taught you," she whispered. He lowered his forehead toward hers, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating between them. "It taught me," he murmured, "that strength does not mean silence, and that some wounds only close when another's hand understands them." Her breath trembled out of her. She felt his presence like a tide rising around her, lifting her, grounding her. "Evelyn," Tawa said, her name like a prayer on his lips, "I carry something I have kept quiet for too long." Her heart pounded in her throat. She felt everything inside her sharpen to a single point. Fear, hope, desire, shame, longing, all gathering like snow tightening its grip on a roof before it slips free. "What is it you're keeping?" she whispered. His eyes softened, dark and full of heat, the kind that could melt through stone if given time. A truth that will change the shape of what you think you deserve. Her breath stopped. Tawa moved even closer, until the space between them was the width of a heartbeat, the air thick with unsaid promises. Snow gusted against the window as if nature itself leaned closer to hear. Evelyn tried to breathe, tried to steady herself, but her voice emerged faint, trembling. "Tell me." He exhaled slowly, the warmth of his breath brushing her cheek like the gentle graze of fate. "I will," he said. "But not until you're ready to believe it." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Tawa reached out, fingers brushing her wrist, a touch subtle but electric, grounding her and unraveling her in the same breath. And then he said the words that froze her where she stood, the words that made the room fall silent around them, the words that shattered every wall she'd spent years building. "There is a truth about my heart, Evelyn. And it has already chosen its path." Before she could ask what path he meant, the church bells outside rang sharply. 3 hollow chimes that tore through the moment like a cold wind through an open door. Tawa's gaze flicked toward the sound, jaw tightening. Something in the settlement had shifted. And the night, once tender, now waited on the edge of something perilous and life-changing. The church bells echoed through the night like a warning pulled from the ribs of winter. Evelyn startled, her breath catching as the final chime faded into the snow-thick air. Tawa stood rigid beside her, every line of his body sharpened with instinct, but when he looked at her again, the tension melted into something softer, something that belonged only to her. She felt the shift as surely as she felt the floor beneath her feet. Outside, footsteps hurried past the windows, townsfolk murmuring about drifting snow, and a wagon stuck near the river. But none of it seemed to matter. The world had narrowed to the space between her heart and his, fragile and burning. She reached for his hand without thinking, fingers trembling as they brushed his. His touch answered immediately, steady, fierce, protective, as though her reaching had unlocked something he had long kept caged. "You said your heart chose a path," she whispered, voice thin with fear and hope. "If I'm the path, then say it. Please." Tawa's breath shook for the first time since she'd met him. He stepped close enough for their foreheads to touch, the warmth of him anchoring her against every cruel word she had ever believed. "I tried to wait," he murmured, "but winter does not wait for courage. It only teaches us what we cannot lose." His hand slid to her cheek, cradling her as if she were something rare. "I love you, Evelyn. Not in silence. Not in secret. Not in spite of anything. Because you are the one place my spirit rests." Her knees weakened, a soft sound escaping her, half sob, half laugh, the sound of a heart breaking open after years of drought. She pressed both hands to his chest, feeling the steady thunder of his pulse beneath her palms. "I don't know how to be loved like that," she whispered. "But I want to learn. If you stay." He pulled her into his arms, strong enough to lift storms, gentle enough to catch her like falling snow. "I will stay anywhere your heart asks me to," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Even if the world turns its back, I will not." Outside, the night howled. Inside, the fire flickered. And between them, something long dormant finally rose, brighter than fear, stronger than winter, certain as dawn. Evelyn lifted her face to him, tears shining like melted frost. "Then teach me," she whispered. And he answered her with a kiss that felt like the first breath of spring breaking through snow. Sometimes love arrives in the quiet places we spent years hiding in, reminding us that even winter-soft hearts deserve a warm home. If this tale touched something inside you, come join our small corner of the frontier. Subscribe to the channel, step into the firelight, and ride with us through more Wild West love stories that heal and inspire. And before you go, tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your presence makes this journey worth telling.